here, this is a more generic advice and recommendations on how to work on a data-driven story, which could be an infographic, a website, a quiz, etc., any of the different shapes that it might take. So in general, when we are working on a data-driven story, these are the stages that we go through. And I think it is especially important for people for whom it will be the first or one of the first works that you create, because when I remember myself, when I was creating my first infographic, it seemed that you need to start working on the final product from the very beginning, and like you just create the infographic as it is in the end. But actually, that's really challenging, and sometimes like beginner teams might find it's very challenging and might feel lost and might even give up. So it is better to take it step by step, and also make use of the mentorship sessions where we will help to guide you through this process. So don't try to finish everything together and then come to us for help, but rather you can use our advices throughout the way. And this is the way that we usually take when we are creating data-driven stories. So first of all, we start by choosing the source and the topic. Here you could look through the sources that we have and choose which one is the best for you, which one is interesting for you. I will give some recommendations on each of them in a minute. But in general, we start by outlining the source and the topic. Then we find the actual question or message that we want to answer using our data product. Then we select a relevant form, which in this case could be whether to make an animation or a dashboard or something else, but also what is the form for our data. So what kind of graph should be used to convey the data, to convey the finding that we have. Then we usually create an outline. So before going on to the final design of our product, we first think about a plan of what it is going to be. What is going to be present there, like in terms of the content. And it makes it much easier because it is much easier to make some changes at this stage before you have invested your time and effort into the actual design. And it is much, I really recommend to have an outline first, to get feedback on this outline, to correct some things, and only then to go on to the next stages. And the next stages would be first to create a sketch. This could be like a prototype of the website or a sketch of an infographic, or in terms of the animation, it would be probably the information on what each frame is going to show. And again, even here, it is a nice idea to get feedback on the sketch itself before you have gone on to the next stage. And the next stage would be to create the design. And here again, once you have the draft of the design, you can show it. By feedback, I mean you can show it to the mentors, but also you could get feedback from your friends or colleagues or within the team. Try to go through it and see if you have any suggestions for changes there. And finally, it would be the publication, which in this case basically means submitting your work to us. And then we never stop receiving feedback after that. We are always also curious to hear what people have to say about our finished product, because while you might not be changing the product that you have now, it is still nice to hear some insights for the future works that you might have. And for many people that I know, this part has also been very helpful. So now let's go quickly about each one of them, and I'll just give some insights from our experience, which will make it easier for you to participate in the challenge. So first of all, we are choosing the source or the topic. So here, what has been very helpful for me and my team members, for example, in some of those challenges, is when we choose something that we ourselves care about. So something that you find interesting. I think it applies to really creating anything, whether you're a journalist writing an article or a filmmaker making a movie. Like you need to work about something that you yourself care about. And how my supervisor at the university says, you need to choose something that you really love or really hate. So you might really hate the violence against civilians or something like that, something that you feel really passionate about, or human rights or something similar. And then it is easier to work on the topic and to present it to other people. So that's the recommendation here. So try to choose something that you yourself really care about. And I guess that is not a very big challenge in the case of this data challenge, because the topics covered here, I think they impact all of us. And I guess any topic that you choose here would probably be something that you care about. But still, you might be more interested in some topics other than the others. Then in general, when we're trying to choose what we're going to show with our product, one other challenge that I have seen with different participants of different competitions is that sometimes they will choose something that has already been talked about many times, and it doesn't seem like they're providing anything new, any new information about that. So it is okay to talk about something that has already been talked about, or maybe is not relevant right now, but then it is nice to provide some new finding or a new perspective. You need to provide something new to the people. If it is possible, it's nice to have the topic being very relevant, so something that people really care about right now. That would be interesting by default. But if you're choosing something that people might not be caring about right now, then at least try to provide some new information so that to get the speaker interested in. Because throughout the whole process, you need to remember that you basically need to be helpful or useful for the reader. You need to provide them with something that will be enlightening for them, which means something that they did not know before, or something that they had not thought about in the way that you're suggesting for them. So just try to imagine yourself. What really helps me in any project is to try and imagine myself in the place of the reader, and think about, if you saw this infographic on social media, would you stop to read it? Or would you think that you already know what it has to say and you would scroll down? So always try to, of course, create something that will be interesting and important for the reader. And finally, look through our suggested resources, but feel free to use something else. Just try to make it relevant to the challenge. Then the second part, after you have specified which source you want to use, which topic in general you want to talk about, is to find a specific question or message that you want to answer with your infographic. So here, in order to do that, what I have seen many teams in our previous competitions struggle with is that they have this big file with some data, and they're sitting there looking at it, and they're trying to come up with some question or message or finding that they want to do the infographic on. And then they come to the mentors and they tell them some like abstract ideas that they have. But sometimes it is really difficult to come up with a question or a message like that. And if you don't have some message specified in advance, which in some cases might be the case, but if you want to look at the data and then find a message, then you need to work with the data. You need to look through it. You need to explore it, and then you will be able to see the messages. So don't try to make yourself struggle and come up with some brilliant idea without actually getting your hands dirty with the data. So in this case, first of all, you would of course need to clean the data so that you can actually operate with it. Depending on the source that you get, it might already be pretty clean, but especially with the Ask.gov data, for example, sometimes the government authorities' data is not very good. So this could be that you have like a data about a single case all within one cell, and it is not separated by columns for different variables, or there are typos, or there could be many different things wrong with the data. So first of all, of course, start by cleaning it so that you are able to work with it. But then once you have a file that is relatively clean and you are able to work with it, then I really suggest that you first analyze it. Even if you don't have some particular question, just whatever idea you get, try it all out. And it will really, really help you with outlining something interesting. So just build many graphs. So sometimes when people come to the mentorship sessions, they will say, oh, I'm thinking of doing this and this, and I'm thinking of looking at such and such question. But it is also really hard for us to help you when we don't see particular graphs and we don't see what the data has to say about that question. Like the question might sound interesting, but we're not able to say whether it is actually going to be interesting or not without seeing what the data has to say about it. And to see that, you need to build many graphs, and then you will be able to see if there are any interesting trends, if there are any interesting changes in the trends. So, for example, some really big surges in exports of Georgia to Russia, or something like that. So I really suggest to get your hands dirty, try many things that you might not even think that you would be interested in doing. But it could be surprising sometimes. If you build many graphs, you might see some interesting findings. So first do that, and then you can choose what specifically out of there you want to use in your infographic or animation or something else. So then you go to the stage of choosing something you find insightful. So to be able to use the mentorship sessions, I really advise you to go through these first parts yourself tonight or tomorrow morning, and then come to the mentors with some findings. Or of course, if you have trouble cleaning the data or building the graphs or something like that, if you have some challenge, of course you can come to us and we will try to help. But at least try to do that yourself and try to have some findings, and then it will be much more easier for us to give you some actual advice that you might use. Because if you just choose this topic and then come to us at that stage, it is very hard for us to give you feedback because there's nothing tangible to actually give you feedback on. That would just be my advice, but feel free to use the mentorship sessions whenever you want. Then after that, once we already have some findings, then we can select a relevant form that we want to show it in. So this includes choosing whether you want to create an infographic or a multimedia story or something else, which of course would also depend on the kind of skills that you have. But also choosing appropriate diagrams or appropriate charts that best convey your message. And here is one of the resources that you can use where you can see the different charts based on their functions. So what they are best in conveying. So for example, like for comparisons, you could use a bar chart, or for showing trends in time, you could use a line chart. But in general, if you need some ideas or help, you could check it there. And here are also different types of charts that we use. And you can, of course, go through that with the mentor as well. Yeah, it would be best if you can already have some examples of what you want to use, and then show it to the mentor and ask their opinion about that. Maybe they have some other ideas about some chart that you didn't remember that would actually make conveying the finding easier. So that's the stage of selecting a relevant form. Then we usually create an outline, and it might be different for you, especially now that you have really limited time. But I would suggest to have at least an outline, maybe in your mind. You don't have to actually create a document with the outline, but try to think about using your findings. What would be the story that you're trying to show on the infographic or website or something else? So have a plan of what will be included. So specific charts that you want to show, some background explanations about the situation, whatever information you want to include. And then think about that. Try to imagine it and think whether it would make it easy for the reader to understand what you're trying to tell them. And here, getting feedback is also usually really helpful. If you come to the mentor and you already have a prepared outline, whether it is actually written out, like when we work on different projects, we just create a document, or you can write it on paper or whatever, and we write out everything, like the name of our project, the actual explanations, the graphs we're going to use. Of course, this is not the finished design, right? We will change the colors, we will change the fonts, etc. But this is the content, all of the content that is going to go on the infographic or some other product. And then it will be very easy for the mentor to give you some feedback as well, because we can already see what is this going to be in the end, even without the design, I mean, content-wise, and we can give you very specific feedback about the content itself. And only after that, like, it is really important to first finish this. So first make the content structured, organized, easy to understand, and only then to go on to the design. Because sometimes we have had cases where teams start with the design straight away, and then they come for feedback, like in the last couple of hours. And if there are some really big improvements that could be made content-wise, it is almost impossible to change that already now that the design has been built. And so then even the mentorship session is not that helpful. So I really, really strongly recommend that you first have some outline or a plan of what you're going to do. But here I don't mean just some abstract plan of, oh, I'm thinking of showing like the refugees from Ukraine, but what specifically are you going to show, and what are the graphs charts that you're going to show? What will be the explanation about those charts? Like have those a tangible outline or a tangible plan of your product. And then I think the mentorship sessions can be most productive if you have those concrete steps already done, and we can give you some actual like advice about what could be changed, perhaps like give you some ideas. And then after that, we go into the design. Sometimes we will, it is good to create a sketch. Maybe you will not have time to actually do it tomorrow, but at least try to think about each part of your product, like in this case, each part of the infographic, like what goes where approximately, before starting the actual final draft, right? The final design. Because if you start by creating the design, like specific fonts, colors, etc., you might then find yourself that you need to move around many things there because it is not well structured. So at least try to have some understanding of what is going to go where, and then go on to the actual design, because that will save you a lot of time. Because especially for people who are not designers, maybe it is easier for designers, but for me, because I don't specialize in design, it takes a lot of time to create it. And then it is much harder to bring some changes there if you need to change something and move something around. So I would advise that you first have some idea about what's going where. And then after that, you go on to design. And I also have a couple of recommendations about the design, which first of all, the biggest principle here, I think, is that you should not spoil good content with bad design. So while, of course, you might not have really expertise on design and you might not be a designer, but you have really good content, I think in some cases it's better to consider having very simple design rather than something overly complicated that makes it impossible to actually read the infographic and get the message, like using too many colors or using too many icons and just making too heavy where we lose the actual content. If you have to choose between those two things, for me personally, I think that it is better to do a little bit under, a little bit less than too much, because then it makes it hard to actually read what you have to say to us. But in general, you could, of course, there's tons and tons of different principles on design, and you could see some tutorials or workshops about that if you're interested on how to use colors and layout and all other things. Of course, we don't have time to cover all of that. But in general, especially because we're creating data-driven stories, you need to remember that we're not just creating art, although sometimes data-driven stories could very much also be pieces of art. But here it is important to not forget about functionality. The whole purpose of the design is to make it easier for the reader to understand what you're telling them. So in all of the previous stages, you need to come up with what you're saying to the reader, why it is important, why it is relevant, what data you use to say it to the reader. And then in the end, the design serves the purpose of making it easier for the reader to actually read it. So it is a good idea to use even simple charts rather than like use some icons instead of the chart where it will be impossible for the reader to understand the numbers. So it is okay to use simple things as long as they actually work. And then, of course, on top of that, it is really nice if your design also looks appealing, looks aesthetic, so that it can also interest the reader to stick around with your data story and to explore it and to read it. So here as well, try to imagine yourself in the reader's perspective and just imagine if you saw something like this on the internet and nobody paid you to read it, would you actually stop and read it and look at it for a long time? If yes, then you're probably doing a good job. So try to have the reader in mind and try to make it functional for the reader. And then finally, of course, we will be publishing this project. So if you're creating a dashboard or if you're creating a website or something more complicated, try to make it in such a way that it is easy to access for other people. And keep in mind that in general, like throughout your project, just keep in mind how you think this product could be used if it was being actually published by some company, right? So try to keep that in mind because, for example, even the design or the text that is going there, it all depends on how you're going to use that product. So, for example, if you're publishing, let's say, I don't know, some little infographics on Instagram, maybe the text needs to be a little bit shorter. It needs to be kind of catchy, something that a person who's scrolling will be able to understand in a few seconds. So maybe don't use too complicated charts. Maybe filter out some information. Only leave the main points or something like that. But if you're creating a long read where you expect that the reader will actually spend a lot of time exploring it and just reading slowly through it, then it is okay to use some more complicated charts, some more detailed information. It all depends on how you think you're going to use this product. Who is the target audience? Who are you creating it for? Now, and then based on that, you can choose both the design, the text that go there, etc. And during the presentation tomorrow, we kindly ask you to tell us a little bit more about that. So tell us a little bit about your vision of who you think this product is for. How is it going to be helpful for them? And then the judges will be able to evaluate how well you actually achieve that purpose of reaching that kind of target audience. So these are the recommendations that I had about that. I really recommend you to use the mentorship sessions because they can be very helpful. Even for me personally, sometimes it is really helpful to just explain what I'm doing to someone else. And it is great to get their advice, but sometimes even just having to present it to someone else before the final product really helps you to get your ideas straight. And you might be able to see what is wrong with your product, even yourself, when you're doing that process. I really strongly encourage you to have something tangible, have a plan of what you're doing, have actual charts that you're going to show, not just an idea of, oh, I'm going to build this chart and see what it shows, but do have an actual chart. Just try different things from the data and then show it to the mentor so that we are able to give you some very concrete feedback because it is usually very hard to give recommendations on some abstract ideas that you might have, because the ideas might sound good, but we don't know what the data has to show. So please do see what the data has to say about it, bring it to the mentorship session, and then we will be able to be more helpful for you. Because what we want to do is we have very limited time tomorrow, and we want to make it as helpful as possible for you. So that is the part about building a data story. And we have a couple of minutes, so I'll just quickly go through some examples of data-driven stories about conflicts. But then we will have the next speaker who will share with us, Katya will share with us her own work, which I really liked, and which will be a great example of a data-driven story about a conflict. But here are some other examples. This is one that we did recently after the Russian military aggression in Ukraine. This is a history of similar actions that Russia has done to other neighboring countries throughout the years. Here's some other example about Georgia's participation in the missions in Afghanistan. This is how we could also sometimes show the different troop levels of different countries, for instance. Here we have an interactive project also done a few years ago, which is called the Known Soldier. And this shows all of the people who fell in Afghanistan, so all of the Georgian soldiers that died during the missions in Afghanistan, and it shows their personal stories and where they come from, and it kind of shows the actual faces behind those numbers and those statistics. Then we have a few other projects which were not done by us, but I really like these examples, and you could also look through them yourself and explore them. Some of these are interactive. Yeah,